Hey everybody, I just want to take a few seconds here to say thank you to everyone who's been leaving likes and positive comments on my videos. The support has been overwhelming, and you guys are the reason I continue to make these videos. So today I'm going to go over how I put together my terrain in the Far Cry 5 arcade editor. Now I know there's a lot of other videos that are really similar to this, but I figured I'd show you how I do it, just in case, I bring up some tips and tricks that other people haven't touched on yet, or I just show you different ways of doing things that are a little bit easier for you. So what you're seeing on screen now is what we're going to be learning to do today. We're going to look at a variety of different things, from mountains to rivers to lakes, and you can take these techniques and apply them to whatever situation you're in. The possibilities are endless with terrain. So if you guys enjoy this, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and let's get right into it. Alright, so the first thing we'll take a look at here in our terrain tools is the raise and lower tool. Now this tool is pretty straightforward, it's exactly what it sounds like. So we have a couple options here. We have radius, which basically will either increase or decrease the size of our selection, and then we have height. Height is just the height of the hill, or how deep the hole we're making will be. And then we have hardness here. Now if you notice, hardness is on 30 by default. And what this does is I'll go ahead and make a hole right here, and then I'll turn hardness up and I'll make another one right here. Now you can see the difference. This one kind of feathers it in, so it will start up here and then slowly get deeper and deeper towards the middle. And then this kind of just immediately drops right off. So hardness basically affects the amount of feathering that happens when making any type of terrain edits. So generally I would say we leave that somewhere around default. You can put it up to 40 if you want. I leave it on 30. And distortion will basically make the hill that we're making, or the hole that we're making, a little bit crooked on the side. You can see that this one's a little bit more bumpy and uneven, and this one is just pretty even on all the sides. Alright, so now we'll jump right into making a mountain. Now the way I like to make my mountains is I like to layer them. Now what I mean by that is I'll basically turn up my radius pretty big and just make the general outline of my mountain on the bottom here. So just draw it in like that. And then what I'll do is I'll turn the radius back down, and then I'll start to draw a hill a little bit further up. Just like that. Kind of cut it across, put some divots in it. And then what I'll do is do it one more time. And then at the very, very top, I'll hit it again. So it basically makes this cascaded look. It gives a lot of realism to it, because it kind of gives the mountain some, steps to it, like water eroded it. So it gives you a pretty cool look. Alright, so the next thing we'll go and take a look at here is erosion. Now erosion does exactly what it sounds like it would. Basically makes the side of the terrain look like it was eroded by water. So we have a couple different options here. We have radius, I'll go ahead and turn that up. And then we have density, which is how deep the little crevices this will be. And then we have deformation, which is how uneven they'll be, and then landslide, which is how steep it's going to cut the side of our hills, and then once again, hardness and distortion. And then just hold down the right trigger, and what you'll notice is it will start to erode the side of the terrain here. Alright, so if I go ahead and zoom in here, you can see we get this really nice effect on the side of the hills. So the next thing we're going to do is put some texture on here. So if we head into our terrain menu, paint texture, we have 4 selections and then a bunch of settings underneath it. Now the first one actually affects the entire map. So you definitely want to pick a good starting point. I'm going to come up here and pick this grass one that I like, Grass Dark 1, and then the next one we'll go ahead and find a cliff texture to paint over. So we'll find this one here. Rock Light 3, we'll see if that looks good. And yeah, okay, so that looks good. So what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and paint everywhere that I see the erosion on the sides of the hill here, and then I'll be right back. Alright, so I got it all painted here. Now one thing I want to tell you before we do any more painting is what the settings underneath do, because they affect what the brush actually looks like. So if we go ahead and go over to radius, again, it just makes it bigger. We have speed, which is how fast the texture will be painted. Hardness, again, same thing as before. And then distortion, which is how uneven this texture will overlap over the one underneath. And then we can change it from a circle to a square. We can set the slope. Alright, so as you can see on the side of the hill here, now it looks like we got rocks. They're eroded and sharp because of the tool that we used earlier. Alright, so this is a pretty good starting point, but we're actually going to take it one level higher by adding in some real rocks. So what we'll do is head into our objects menu, head into nature, then to rocks, and you want to find the rock that best matches the texture that you put in here. So in my case it's coastal. I would recommend you just go through and find whichever one works the best for you. And then what you want to do is run through the list here and just add in any rocks that you think might be useful to you. As you can see, there's multiple different sizes. There's big ones, small ones. I would recommend you add in a variety of them, and then I'll be back once I do that. Alright, so now that I have a pretty good variety of rocks to choose from here, spawned into the editor, we're actually going to go and start adding them to the side of our mountain here. And the goal is to basically make this little bump look like an actual cliff. So what you need to do is find a rock that you think will best work for the situation that you're in. I'm going to go ahead and choose this one here, and you want to just bring it over to where you want it. Now, one thing I would recommend is if you jump into the menu, go down to editor options, editor settings, and it's second from the bottom you have keep objects with terrain. Go ahead and shut that off. Now what that will do is allow you to more freely move objects without them actually sticking to the ground. Alright, so the next thing we'll do is move this down a little bit, and we're going to try and rotate it to get it to fit our terrain just the way we want. And I think right about here looks good. Again, you can raise and lower it, just kind of get it in position where it looks natural with your hill. I'm going to try and line the back of it up here against the hill. So go ahead and move it in a tad bit more. And I think that's about good there. So if you notice there's any spots here on the side that don't really look that natural, you can go ahead and take some other rocks and kind of just fill in the sides here. So I'll take this one, bring it up, put it where I think it looks good, and I'm going to click right on the D-pad to actually make a copy of that just in case we need it again for later. Okay, so I think that looks good. Now that you guys get the general idea of what I'm doing here, I'm going to go ahead and place the rest of the rocks in, and I'll be back. Alright, so now I have my rocks placed where I want them. The next thing I'm going to get into is how to make rivers. And I'm actually going to make one right here at the bottom of this hill. And the way I'm going to do that is open up my terrain menu, head into terrain tools, and I'm going to take out the flatten tool. Now again, flatten tool does exactly what it sounds like it does. And we have pretty much all the same options as I've already gone over with some of the other stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just lower a radius down a little bit. I'm going to bring it right over here and just hold down the right trigger, and you'll see it will start to flatten the ground here. I'm going to go ahead and just flatten it right alongside our rocks here, and this will actually be the riverbed. Alright, so now that that's all set, the next thing we're going to do is grab our flatten tool and bring it over here and make sure it's set to the same height that you have your riverbed at, and we're going to go ahead and just bring it into our terrain here and put it right there. Now, you may think that looks absolutely terrible, but what we're going to do is actually turn this into a waterfall. So how we do that is we're going to line the inside of this with rocks, kind of like we did with this side of the riverbed. Okay, so all I did to quickly build that there was just take rocks from the side of the hill here, go ahead and duplicate them, bring them over to the waterfall, and just place them wherever it looks good. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is build the other side of our riverbank here. Now there's two ways you can do this. The first is go ahead into your terrain tools, grab your raise and lower tool, and you can basically just raise the other side of the terrain here, and then take your smooth tool and smoothen it out, and what you'll end up with is just the other side of your river. Now the way I like to do it is actually use rocks. So a quick way to do it is go ahead, and as you can see earlier when we were placing rocks on the hill, we already put a ton of them right here. So all I have to do is go ahead and click on it, click right on the D-pad, and just drag it to the opposite side here and place it, and then I'll just go ahead and do that for all the other rocks here, and what you'll see is it will start to look like a riverbed. Okay, so now that that's all set, the next thing we're ready to do is start adding in water. So we'll do that by heading into terrain, water, lakes, and these are basically just giant squares of water that we can add in. In this case, we're going to use them to make a river. So if we go ahead and lower them down, I keep mine pretty low to the ground because I want to be able to actually see the texture underneath. So I'll put it about right there, seems good. Now I'm going to bring it over here, and we have a few options. So if we head into object options, custom properties, we can change the width of this, which you'll notice will make it longer that way. Change the length, will make it bigger the other way. So we'll go ahead and just turn that up a little bit. And the one at the bottom here is probably the most important. We can actually change how the water looks. So we can just cycle through here, pick one we want. I'm going to use this one called sulfur. And then what we'll do is just go ahead and copy and paste these. Alright, so now it's time to actually add some water effects to that waterfall we put together earlier. In order to do that, we'll come into Objects, Lights and Effects, down to Water, and we have a couple different things we can pick from here. So there's Waterfall Large, which I'm going to use. There's Splashing for the top of a waterfall, for the bottom. There's a couple different ones. You can just go ahead and pick whichever ones you think that you'll end up using. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take Waterfall Large and lift it up here, and you can kind of see that it gives you this effect that there's water falling from a waterfall. So we'll go ahead and just kind of place these right here next to our rock. So you can see this one here kind of gives you more of that effect, like there's water falling down here. And you want to try and place them as close as you can get to the rock and get it as even as you can with the top of it to make it look like the water's actually pouring over. Now another important part to making this look realistic is the back of the waterfall. If you notice, if I come down here where the player would be standing, you can still kind of see the background up there a little bit, that grass texture. So what we need to do to get rid of that is just go ahead and open up our terrain tools, our raise and lower tool, and you don't even need to put another water source up here if the player can't see it. Just go ahead and carve out where your river would be, and what I'm actually going to do is place a rock right there. So I'll go ahead and just find one that we used on the hill here, duplicate it, and I'll just place it wherever it looks natural. Try and place it back a little bit more here. But right there looks good. So now if I come down here, what you'll notice is now it kind of looks like, the cliff extends down here and the river is to our left over there. So now that the waterfall is all done, the next thing I'm going to teach you guys how to do is make a lake. And I'm actually going to use a different technique to make that than I made the river. You can use this technique for lakes as well. But, some people learn different ways, and I want to try and give you guys as many different ways of doing things, because, some are easier than others. So what we'll do is head into terrain, and I'm going to go to our flatten tool, just make sure we're on the right height here, and I'm just going to extend our terrain out here so we have room to make our lake. And obviously we decided not to use this area where we textured earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and actually fix that as well. So this technique of making rivers and lakes is different because if you notice over here, we relied heavily on rocks to make the side of our river, and over here we're going to rely heavily on the terrain tools. So in order to start out here, we'll go into terrain, raise and lower, and just adjust our settings where we need them. So you want to make the radius about the size of the pond or lake that you're setting up. The height I would leave somewhere between 2 and 3 unless you're going for something really deep. Hardness you can set at 50, that's what I'm using, pick whatever you want. And then distortion, I would leave it about 100. Like I explained to you earlier, that makes the sides of this a little uneven, and no pond or lake is actually 100% even on the sides. So I'll go ahead and click the left trigger and just start dropping it down, and I think that's about a pretty good size right there. And what we're going to do is actually make a little waterfall come out from in between these two rocks here. Now we need to add some texture to this, so I'll go ahead and open up our menu, paint texture, and we're going to use our last option here. And I'm actually going to use sand for this one, so I'll go ahead and just find one I like, pick sand 3, and I'm going to start painting in here, and I'm going to leave the edges a little bit weaker, try and fade it into the grass, so that way it gives it a more realistic coastline. Now the last thing I like to do when I'm making lakes to give it that extra level of realism is to make it look like the water is kind of pulling sand in from the shoreline. Now this is actually really simple to do. Go into your terrain tools, open up erosion, keep all the settings pretty much on the same, just adjust your radius to whatever you need, and then go ahead and start eroding the side of your lake. So if I go ahead and zoom in here, you'll see that the sand now has this rippling effect on it. Now what we need to do is actually smooth those out. So we'll go ahead and open up the smooth tool and make sure that your speed is on pretty low. I'd say around 6 or 7, because if it's too high, you'll actually completely get rid of those ripples. I'm going to go ahead and turn mine up to, we'll say 7, just to try it out. I'll go ahead and just do one run around the side here, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at it. So like I said, now you have this cool effect like the water has been pulling sand off the shoreline, and you'll notice it much more when we actually place water in here. Now the final thing to setting this up is just putting together our little waterfall we want to make here. So I'm going to go find some rocks that we used over here. Again, just duplicate them. And that's the nice part about this is, you know, once you start adding in a bunch of rocks, you can kind of just duplicate them. It eliminates having to dig through the menu. Okay, so now I have a pretty natural rock formation set up here for our waterfall. All we have to do is go ahead and add those objects again. So lights and effects, water. We'll go ahead and add in these small size ones here. And I actually realized I forgot to add in a splash up here in the big waterfall. So we'll just go ahead and put one in there. And you'll notice the effect that that gives it. Just go ahead and drop it below where the water is falling off the rocks. And you'll see it will kind of give you this cool like misting effect. Bring it up a little bit more here, and I think that looks good to me. Okay, now we'll start building our small waterfall. So now that our water effects are all set up, the last thing we have to do is go up here, grab one of these lakes, and go ahead and just put it to whatever level you want, and then adjust the size to make it fit. So now we have this nice little lake set up here with the waterfall coming from the river up above. So the way that I usually make my trails is I'll go ahead and open up the terrain menu here and open up the smooth tool once again. Now you want a pretty low radius, make it about the width you want your trail to be, and then turn your speed all the way up and make sure that the hardness setting is pretty high as well. So what I'll do is go ahead and just hold down the trigger, and you'll see that it will obviously just smooth out the terrain and kind of just run this where you want to make your trail, run it back and forth, just trying to level out the ground. So now that our path is all set, I just want to quickly go over the last two terrain tools that we haven't looked at yet. The first being the noise tool. Now the noise tool basically makes a bunch of distortion is my best explanation for it. But it's really called noise. You'll see if you go down and hold it down here, it will basically create this really bumpy and mountainy type terrain here. So you can go ahead and play with the settings, adjust them to whatever looks good for you. So now you can see we have this really nice backdrop here. I'm going to go ahead and actually use our rock texture and paint it on there so it looks a little bit more realistic. Alright, so the last tool we can take a look at is the Howl tool. Now what this is used for is basically cutting parts of the terrain out in order to make a cave or something like that. It's very, very basic. There's only one setting, just radius. You can make it pretty large. If you go ahead and cut it, you can see, you know, you can go right through the terrain now. So if you were to place a bunker or something like that and you wanted it to go underground, that's how you would do that. So the last thing we're going to go over to complete our tutorial is foliage. There's actually one more tool that I haven't shown you yet called the ramp tool. Now it's very simple. Just click the right trigger wherever you want your ramp to start. Go up to another point, click it again, and you'll see that it will quickly just make you this ramp here. This is good for roads and things like trails as well. So we'll go ahead and open up our menu, go to terrain, and then add vegetation. And if you click on that, you notice we have a variety of different settings here. Now what I would recommend you do is go ahead and place in the smaller stuff first, like bushes or grass, and then place in your trees afterwards. So in my case, I'm going to use bushes. Just find whatever one you want. I'm going to choose fern 1. And then go ahead and just paint this everywhere you plan on putting foliage. So now that that's all set, we can go ahead and move on to trees. Now one bit of advice I would give you is try and keep these off the rocks, because in most cases, you know, it's not realistic to have bushes growing on vertical rocks like that, so just try and avoid it. Okay, for trees, I ended up choosing hemlock. You can choose whatever works for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of paint these in. Now with trees, there's no really set thing to do here. What I like to do is kind of space them out. Kind of, you know, just place them around. I don't group them all in one spot because, you know, it really depends on the type of terrain that you're going for, but I'm kind of looking for a more open, woodsy looking terrain. Okay, so I have all my trees added in. Now the one little thing I will show you just as an extra hint with foliage is adding it into your rivers and lakes to give it a little bit more realism. So we'll go ahead and go to our third tab over here, bushes, and just find whichever ones you want to use. I'm going to use Choke Cherry 1. So I'll go ahead and start placing these in here. Okay, so we're pretty much done with the terrain. One more thing I'm going to do is apply some environmental settings, which I went over in my last video. If you're interested in learning how to do that stuff, go ahead and check that out. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to do a playthrough so you can actually see what the terrain looks like when the map is being played. Okay, so our terrain is finally done, guys. Now you might notice I put some rocks on the other hills we made over there just because it adds more depth to it. I basically just did the same thing I did with the rocks over here. Now if you look at the combination between the terrain tools we used, the rocks we placed in, the foliage, it just looks so realistic. And you can also tell that the environmental settings that I applied also help the look of this map and like tremendously. So I would definitely recommend you check that out. These kind of go hand in hand. So we'll head over here and just take a look at our waterfall. You can see we kind of have this effect that the water is rushing downstream because of that water effect we added earlier. So our river looks pretty good. We'll head down here and look at the other part of it. And alright, that looks good to me. You can see it just looks so realistic with the rocks on the side here. You know, we got the foliage in the water. So the last thing we'll take a peek at is the lake we made. Now I added in this little silo here so we can just head up and look at our other waterfall. Alright, so there we go. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it helped you out. I know there's a lot of other tutorials like this, but I figured I'd just show you guys how I do it. Hoping to give you, you know, maybe 1 or 2 tips that you find useful, or just a different technique for making terrain. So if you guys did enjoy it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more tutorials.